During a brutal snowstorm in New York, a billionaire gives shelter to a homeless woman, but when he sees the tattoo of a black rose on her arm, he is left frozen, because that symbol holds the darkest secret of his family's past. What she reveals will force him to confront everything he thought he knew about his legacy. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're enjoying these dramatic stories, don't forget to like this video. Enjoy the story. A blizzard had swallowed Manhattan whole, turning the city into a frozen tomb. From the penthouse of Crane Tower, Alexander Crane stared out over the blanketed streets, a crystal glass of bourbon in hand, its contents untouched. The snowstorm had brought the relentless hum of the city to a rare silence, one that Alexander found unsettling. He thrived in movement, in the rhythm of deals and power plays, not in this cold pause that left room for thoughts he usually buried beneath his empire's demands. Tonight, there were no meetings, no distractions, only the quiet company of his own reflection in the glass and the looming shadow of a father's legacy he had never escaped. Downstairs, as if summoned by fate, an unexpected interruption flickered. Across the security feed, a young homeless woman had stumbled into the lobby seeking refuge from the cold. The guards moved swiftly, already dragging her out toward the blinding snow. Bored and restless, Alexander glanced at the screen. Something about the woman's posture stopped him. Upright, calm, her gaze steady despite her situation. Not pleading, not desperate. With a flick of a finger, he pressed the intercom. "Bring her up," he said, his tone half amused, half commanding. "Let's see what kind of courage she really has." Minutes later, Eliza Monroe stood in his marble foyer, her layered, threadbare clothing dripping with melted snow. No gratitude flickered in her eyes as they met his. If anything, her stare held a kind of defiance, as though she had known this moment might come. Alexander, amused by her composure, motioned toward the fire. "You're cold. Warm yourself." He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, placing one untouched on the table. She ignored it. As Eliza knelt by the grand hearth, rolling up her damp sleeves to extend her arms toward the flames, something caught Alexander's eye. A faded black tattoo, intricate and unmistakable, coiling around her forearm, a black rose. The sight slammed into him like a fist to the chest. The black rose, a symbol burned into his memory. It had belonged to an exclusive club of industrial elites, a brotherhood where his father, Henry Crane, had once reigned, until scandal and betrayal had seen him expelled in disgrace, a wound that had never healed. Alexander's breath caught. He stared at the tattoo, trying to mask the sudden wave of unease. Eliza's voice cut through the silence. "You know what this means, and you know why I'm here." Her words were calm, deliberate. "I am Eliza Monroe, daughter of Richard Monroe." The name landed like a second blow. Richard Monroe, an honorable man, crushed beneath the weight of Henry Crane's ruthless ambition, driven to ruin and an early grave. The sins of the father had found their way to the son. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. Alexander, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent rivals to his will, found himself caught in the web of a past he had spent a lifetime denying. His instincts screamed to reassert control, to silence her. "What is it you want?" he asked, voice colder than the blizzard beyond the glass. Eliza's gaze didn't waver. "You invited me here," she said softly. Now you'll hear what I have to say." There was no fear in her voice, no plea for mercy, only the quiet certainty of someone who had lost everything, yet still stood tall. In the heart of the Crane Empire, as the storm howled against the windows, Alexander realized he had invited far more than a stranger into his sanctuary. He had invited a reckoning, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what would happen next. Alexander Crane had built his empire on the belief that everything and everyone had a price. Negotiation, intimidation, acquisition, these were the languages he spoke fluently. But as Eliza Munro sat across from him in the cavernous living room of his penthouse, her soaked clothes steaming in the heat of the fire, he sensed instinctively that those tools would fail here. She had not arrived to bargain nor to beg. She had come to expose something, and Alexander's impulse was to neutralize the threat before it gained traction. Without wasting time, he summoned his legal counsel, instructing them to prepare a discreet settlement offer. Money, in the amounts Crane Industries could deploy, usually ended inconvenient conversations quickly. By the following afternoon, a discreet envelope was delivered to the location where Eliza had been staying. Inside, a check with 7 figures and a letter drafted by Alexander himself, urging her to accept the gift in recognition of her father's unfortunate history. No admission of guilt, of course, just the cold language of corporate appeasement. Alexander waited for the expected call from his counsel, confirming her acceptance. But the call never came. Instead, a small weathered envelope arrived at Crane Tower. Inside was the check, torn neatly down the middle, and a handwritten note that read, "Dignity is not for sale." The rejection stung in ways Alexander could not fully explain. No, one refused him not like this, not without consequence. Yet beyond the insult, something deeper unsettled him, the calm certainty with which she had dismissed the offer. He had misread her entirely. She was not playing for leverage. There was something larger at work here, something that would not be diffused with money. He ordered a full background check, bypassing his usual channels and enlisting a trusted private investigator. He wanted everything, her movements, her contacts, her history. If she carried a threat to his empire, he would understand it fully. The report came back quickly, compiled in brutal detail. Eliza Munro had been a rising star, top of her class at Harvard Law, a career that had seemed destined for prominence. But her father's fall had cast a long shadow. When Richard Munro's company collapsed under a barrage of legal and financial attacks orchestrated, the report implied, by Henry Crane's inner circle, doors closed around Eliza. Job offers vanished. Colleagues distanced themselves. Attempts to rebuild her life were met with quiet obstruction. One by one, opportunities were stripped away until only the streets remained. Alexander studied the report late into the night, unease growing with each page. It was not the legal exposure that disturbed him. Crane Industries had weathered worse storms. It was the picture of a life systematically dismantled, not by accident, but by design. A life broken by the very machine his family controlled. He realized with a chill that his father's sins were not ancient history. They were living consequences, embodied in the woman who had stood before his fire. Compelled by something he would not yet name, Alexander arranged a second meeting. This time no games, no grand gestures, just an invitation. If she wished to speak further, she could return. He expected her to ignore it. But 2 days later, as the blizzard melted into grey slush on the streets below, Eliza arrived once more at Crane Tower. No security escort this time. She walked through the lobby with the same unflinching poise as before. In the penthouse, the conversation unfolded not as confrontation, but as a slow peeling away of truths. Alexander began with a direct question. "You have something you intend to use against me," he said. "Why haven't you done so already?" Eliza met his gaze without hesitation. "Because this is not about you. Not entirely. It is about the truth. The truth of what your father did and the people who helped him do it. I have documents, proof, enough to destroy what remains of your family's illusion of legitimacy. But I wanted to see for myself if you were the same as him." The words struck hard. Alexander felt a flare of anger, but it subsided beneath something. An unfamiliar sense of shame. He asked her to show the documents. Eliza refused. "Not yet," she said. "First, I want you to understand what your father took. Not just wealth, not just a company. He took a man's dignity, his will to live, and the world forgot him as if he had never mattered." Through the hours that followed, Eliza spoke with precision and restraint, weaving a story of quiet devastation. Her father's descent, her own struggles, the calculated cruelty that had followed them both. Alexander listened, compelled despite himself. He saw in her not a rival or a threat, but a mirror held up to his own inheritance. For the first time, the comfortable distance between himself and the sins of his father collapsed. Yet even as he felt the stirrings of empathy, another voice rose within him, the voice of the strategist. The risk was immense. If her documents were as damning as she claimed, they could unravel the carefully curated image of Crane Industries. The board would turn on him. Investors would flee. He could not allow that. And yet here she was, offering a path that might destroy him, yet refusing to wield it recklessly. The contradiction fascinated him. In her refusal to embrace vengeance, Eliza displayed a strength Alexander found himself respecting, even admiring. But admiration did not erase the threat. He knew the machine he had inherited would not tolerate such danger left unchecked. As Eliza departed that evening, leaving behind only the echo of her father's name, Alexander faced a decision that no amount of wealth or power could simplify. For once, he was not certain which path he would take. And for the first time in years, the uncertainty felt almost freeing. In the days that followed their second meeting, Alexander Crane found himself pacing corridors he had rarely entered, the archives of Crane Industries, where decades of corporate history were buried beneath layers of dust and self-serving narratives. Driven by a gnawing need to understand the truth, he ordered restricted files pulled from deep storage, documents his father had sealed long ago. Each folder opened was another incision into the carefully bandaged corpse of his family's legacy. With every letter, every recorded memo, the portrait of Henry Crane grew darker. Collusion, blackmail, the deliberate ruination of Richard Monroe, orchestrated with chilling precision. The old man had not merely destroyed a competitor, he had annihilated a life. Unearthing these truths shifted something fundamental in Alexander. For years, he had worn the Crane name like armor, accepting its privileges without questioning the cost. Now stripped of ignorance, that armor felt like a weight pulling him down. Yet even as this realization deepened, another force pulled at him. self-preservation. If Eliza released her evidence, the empire he had spent his adult life commanding would crumble overnight. The board would not stand by him. Worse, Preston Hale, chairman and longtime family ally, would seize the opportunity to consolidate power. There would be no redemption in defeat, only disgrace. Seeking clarity, Alexander visited the one person who might provide it without agenda, his estranged mother, Evelyn Crane. She had withdrawn from public life after Henry's death, retreating to a quiet brownstone untouched by the opulence of Crane Tower. At first reluctant to speak, Evelyn softened as Alexander, stripped of his usual arrogance, confessed the weight of what he had uncovered. When he mentioned Eliza Munro by name, Evelyn's expression turned grave. "Your father destroyed that family," she said quietly, "and I remained silent when I should have spoken. Some debts cannot be repaid, but they can be acknowledged." Her words carried a conviction that cut deeper than any corporate report. They confirmed what Alexander now understood. This was not merely a legal or financial crisis. It was a moral reckoning. Yet acknowledging that truth brought no clear solution. The machinery of Crane Industries was vast and merciless. Preston Hale, sensing weakness, had already begun moving pieces behind the scenes, quietly courting board members, preparing for a power shift. Alexander could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. Meanwhile, Eliza's presence lingered in his thoughts like a haunting refrain. He replayed their conversation in quiet moments, struck by her composure, her refusal to wield her leverage vindictively. She had not sought his ruin. She had sought acknowledgement. And yet, her possession of those documents represented an existential threat, not only to Crane Industries, but to the thousands whose livelihoods depended upon it. The dilemma tightened around Alexander like a noose. To act in conscience risked the collapse of everything, yet to suppress the truth would make him complicit in the sins he now condemned. Haunted by indecision, Alexander arranged a third meeting, this time in neutral territory, a quiet room at the Metropolitan Club, chosen deliberately to strip away the intimidating trappings of his own domain. Eliza arrived alone, her expression guarded but calm. He wasted no time. "I've read the documents," he said. "I know the truth, and I know what will happen if you release them. Not just to me, but to thousands who had no part in what was done." Eliza listened without interrupting, her gaze unwavering. When he finished, she spoke with measured restraint. "I don't want to destroy innocent lives, but the truth cannot remain buried. It must be known even if the cost is high." There was no bargaining in her tone, no hint of opportunism, only the steady conviction of someone who had endured too much to be swayed by threats or promises. Alexander, sensing the futility of negotiation, shifted his approach. "Then let it be known on my terms," he said. "Give me time to act first. Let me face this publicly, not as damage control, but as acknowledgement. If I fall, so be it. But let me choose how." For a long moment, Eliza regarded him in silence. Then, with a slight nod, she replied, "You have one chance, don't waste it." As she left, Alexander felt the weight of her trust settle upon him, a trust he had not earned, yet could not betray. The path ahead was clear now, if treacherous. He would confront his board, expose the truth and face the consequences without seeking refuge in wealth or power. Yet he knew the battle would not be fought in the open alone. Behind the scenes, Preston Hale was already tightening his grip, preparing to frame Alexander's impending confession as a desperate act of self-preservation orchestrated by a manipulative outsider. Returning to Crane Tower, Alexander prepared for war, not of profit margins and shareholder votes, but of conscience and legacy. He summoned his closest advisors, laid out the facts without embellishment, and instructed them to prepare a press conference that would leave no room for spin. "We do this clean," he said. "No lies, no shields." Some protested, others resigned on the spot, but a core few remained, those who understood that integrity once lost could never be reclaimed. As the hour of reckoning approached, Alexander stood alone in his office, gazing once more at the storm-washed city below. He thought of his father, of the empire he had built on the bones of others, and of the young woman who had forced him to see the truth. The future was uncertain. The cost would be immense. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Crane would speak not as an heir to power, but as a man seeking, however late, to right a wrong that had stained his name and soul. As Alexander Crane prepared to take control of the narrative and expose the truth about his father's crimes, the forces arrayed against him were already moving. Preston Hale, sensing opportunity in Alexander's sudden moral awakening, acted swiftly. Long accustomed to navigating corporate power plays with ruthless precision, Preston summoned an emergency meeting of the Crane Industries board. Under the guise of protecting the company's stability, he began sowing doubt about Alexander's state of mind and intentions, framing his planned confession as an erratic response to pressure from an unstable outsider. Preston understood the stakes. If Alexander succeeded in making a public admission on his own terms, the board's control would weaken. If he was discredited first, the old guard could contain the fallout and preserve their grip on the company. Word of Preston's maneuver reached Alexander through one of his few remaining loyal allies on the board, Mark Ellison. A seasoned executive, with little taste for corporate intrigue, Ellison warned Alexander that Hale was preparing a vote of no confidence that could strip him of the CEO role before he ever reached the podium. "You'll be gone by the end of the week if you wait," Ellison said. "You need to act now, publicly, before they can silence you." The warning left no room for hesitation. Alexander instructed his team to move the press conference up, giving Hale no time to execute his plan. Meanwhile, Preston initiated his own media campaign. Leaked documents and carefully crafted rumors painted Alexander as a man manipulated by Eliza Monroe, a woman portrayed as a vengeful con artist exploiting an old family grievance. The smear campaign spread quickly across financial news outlets. Within hours, headlines questioned Alexander's judgment and stability. Investors panicked. Stock prices wavered. The board's support began to fracture. Alexander, monitoring the storm from his office, felt the walls closing in, but there was no turning back. Each lie broadcasted by Preston only deepened his resolve to speak the truth openly. As the hour of the press conference approached, Alexander received a discreet message from Eliza. "They are moving against you," it read. "If you want to back out, I'll understand." He stared at the words for a long moment before typing a simple reply. "I won't run." Her trust had given him clarity. He had been born into power, taught that control and image were everything. Now stripped of both, he would reclaim what mattered more, his own integrity. He reviewed his prepared statement one last time. No spin, no defense, just the truth. Downstairs, the lobby of Crane Tower buzzed with reporters and cameras. The board members, summoned to the top floor by Preston for a final attempt at damage control, watched helplessly as Alexander bypassed them entirely and entered the press room alone. No entourage, no advisors, just a single man confronting the weight of his family's sins. The cameras snapped to life as he took the podium. The room fell silent. Alexander began not with apology but with acknowledgement. He spoke clearly, his voice steady despite the torrent of conflicting emotions within. Today, I stand before you not as a corporate leader seeking to preserve an empire, but as a man seeking to confront a truth long buried beneath privilege and power. My father, Henry Crane, orchestrated the destruction of Richard Monroe's life and legacy. In doing so, he betrayed every principle this company claims to uphold, and I, by turning a blind eye to that history, have been complicit. The room remained hushed as Alexander laid out the evidence. Internal memos, financial transactions, legal manipulations, all meticulously detailed and impossible to deny. The narrative Preston had attempted to spin crumbled under the weight of documented fact. As Alexander spoke, board members exchanged frantic glances, their carefully constructed facade unraveling live before the public. Preston himself, watching from an adjoining room, knew the battle was lost the moment Alexander produced the original. Sealed documents bearing his father's signature. The impact was immediate. News outlets broadcasted the confession in real time, headlines shifting from speculation to stark reality. Crane Industries' stock plummeted. Investors demanded accountability. Yet amidst the chaos, a strange calm settled over Alexander. For the first time in his life, he had chosen the harder path, not out of strategy but conviction. He concluded his statement with finality. I will step down as CEO effective immediately. Those who have perpetuated this culture of deceit will face justice. Let the truth speak for itself. As he left the podium, the press clamored for more, but Alexander offered no further comment. In the quiet that followed, Eliza watched the broadcast from a small apartment uptown. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes shimmered with something between relief and sadness. The man who had once represented everything she hated about the Crane name had chosen to face his own darkness. Whether it would be enough, she could not yet say, but it was more than she had expected. Back at Crane Tower, the fallout was swift. Federal authorities, already tipped off by Alexander's disclosure, issued subpoenas. Preston Hale and his closest allies were arrested within days, their long history of complicity laid bare. The Crane Empire would survive, though forever altered, and Alexander, now stripped of title and power, walked away from the tower without regret. His legacy would be defined not by the wealth he preserved, but by the truth he finally chose to tell. The aftermath of Alexander Crane's public confession unfolded with a momentum no one could fully control. The news cycle, already ravenous after the live broadcast, devoured every angle of the story. Crane Industries became a national headline, not for its market innovations, but for a decades-old corporate crime now laid bare. Across the country, commentators debated whether Alexander's actions were courageous or calculated. Inside the company, chaos reigned. Shareholders panicked, and the board splintered under public and legal scrutiny. Preston Hale and several board members were arrested within 48 hours. Their financial manipulations and conspiracy fully exposed through Alexander's meticulous release of documents to federal prosecutors. What had begun as a desperate attempt to contain the past had ignited a corporate firestorm that would reshape the Crane empire forever. For Alexander, the days that followed were a blur of statements, depositions, and abrupt farewells. His resignation, announced at the conclusion of the press conference, took immediate effect. Security cleared his office within hours. No farewell ceremony was arranged. No board members came to shake his hand. In the eyes of the corporate world, he was a fallen leader who had chosen principle over preservation, a rare act that left most of his former peers unsettled. Yet Alexander felt no bitterness as he stepped out of Crane Tower for the final time. The weight that had shadowed him for so long had lifted. He had faced the truth and chosen not to run. Whatever came next would be lived on his own terms. Meanwhile, Eliza Munro maintained her distance. She had watched the confession alone, her heart torn between vindication and a quiet sorrow that no public reckoning could erase the personal losses she had endured. The documents she had safeguarded for so many years had served their purpose, yet closure remained elusive. Justice, however public, could not restore her father's life or the years stolen from her own. Still, Alexander's choice to confront the truth had altered something in her view of him. The man she had once seen solely as an heir to corruption had proven capable of moral courage. Flawed, perhaps, but real. She chose not to contact him immediately. Some silences were better left undisturbed. In the weeks that followed, federal prosecutors pursued a sweeping investigation into Crane Industries' leadership. Arrests continued as new evidence surfaced. Public trust in the company eroded, and major clients distanced themselves. Yet amidst the wreckage, some voices called for preserving the core business and its thousands of innocent employees. A restructuring plan began to take shape under new leadership unaffiliated with the old regime. Alexander observed these developments from afar, refusing interviews and declining to engage in public debates about his actions. He had no interest in redemption narratives spun by the media. The truth had been told. That was enough. Privately, Alexander began to piece together a life beyond the empire that had once defined him. He retreated to a modest residence outside the city, away from the relentless scrutiny. There, in long walks and late-night reflections, he confronted the man he had been and the man he had chosen to become. The process was neither simple nor linear. Regret lingered, as did anger at himself for having allowed his father's shadow to shape so much of his life. Yet beneath the turmoil lay a hard-won clarity. The choice to face the truth had not destroyed him. It had freed him. One evening, months after the storm had passed, a letter arrived without fanfare. It was from Eliza. Written in her precise hand, it was brief. The truth matters, your choice mattered, that is all. There was no invitation for further contact, no sentiment beyond the simple acknowledgement of shared understanding. Alexander read the letter several times, its quiet grace resonating more deeply than any public accolade ever could. He placed it in a drawer, not to be displayed, but to be kept as a reminder of the path he had chosen. Life moved forward. Crane Industries, battered but intact, emerged under new leadership with a renewed commitment to transparency. Preston Hale and his co-conspirators faced lengthy prison sentences. Public memory, as it always does, gradually shifted to new headlines. Yet for those closest to the events, the impact remained indelible. Alexander, no longer a public figure, embraced the obscurity he had once feared. In quiet moments, he understood that the legacy of his actions would be measured not in headlines or stock prices, but in the silent knowledge that he had not repeated his father's mistakes. In the city, Eliza continued her legal work, now with a focus on corporate accountability. The scars of the past remained, but her resolve had sharpened. Justice was not a single act, but a continual effort. She did not seek reconciliation with Alexander. Both understood that their paths, though once entwined, had diverged. Yet a mutual respect remained, a recognition that in confronting the weight of their shared history, both had chosen to act when it mattered most. For Alexander Crane, the empire had fallen away. What remained was a life reclaimed, one choice at a time. Months passed, not with the thunder of grand revelations or the noise of further scandals, but with the quieter shifts that mark the true aftermath of such events. Crane Industries, now under new management, kept a low profile as it rebuilt from the wreckage left by the exposure of its past. The headlines faded, as they always do, and the world's attention moved elsewhere. But in certain corners, boardrooms newly cautious, legal circles more vigilant, younger executives less certain of old assumptions, the echo of Alexander Crane's decision still resonated, not in speeches, but in altered tones, in smaller, more deliberate actions. Alexander had retreated to a modest brownstone on the edge of the Hudson, a place unremarkable in its exterior, but chosen for its solitude. He lived simply now, a deliberate contrast to the layered artifice of his former life. The days took on a steady rhythm, long walks through unfamiliar neighborhoods, hours spent reading papers and histories he might once have dismissed as irrelevant. The phone rang less often, he answered it even less. Interviews were declined without comment. Invitations to corporate functions were discarded unread. If the world wanted a redemption story, he would not oblige. He had not earned such ease. Occasionally, fragments of his old life brushed against the new. A former colleague, meeting him on the street, would offer an awkward nod or attempt a clumsy conversation about moving forward. Alexander would answer politely, then drift away. He had no wish to dwell on what could not be undone. Yet he watched from a careful distance the subtle changes that followed the storm he had unleashed. Boards grew more cautious about silence. Corporate lawyers drafted different clauses. Language weighted with new awareness. Young professionals whispered his name not with derision, but with a wary sort of respect. The machine did not stop, but it had been reminded of its fallibility. Eliza remained present in his thoughts, though they did not speak. Her letter rested in a drawer, untouched since the day it arrived. Alexander had no desire to force another meeting or to offer some false gesture of connection. The space between them was honest. Each had chosen it. Yet on certain evenings, walking past the law office where he knew she worked, he would pause for a moment, not to intrude, but to acknowledge. Life had moved on, and rightly so, but the thread of that shared reckoning, thin and unseen, remained. One cold evening, nearly a year after the confession, Alexander attended a small public lecture on corporate ethics, not by invitation, but drawn by curiosity. The room was modest, filled with young professionals and a few gray-haired veterans of industries that had not changed as much as they claimed. He sat in the back, unnoticed. The speaker, a professor with clear eyes and a voice free of rhetoric, spoke of responsibility, not as an abstract ideal, but as a matter of choice in moments that test character. No reference was made to Crane Industries or its scandal, but, as the lecture ended and the audience rose, Alexander felt a quiet understanding pass through him. He left without speaking, stepping back into the night with an unfamiliar lightness. Winter returned to the city. One evening, during a benefit concert at Carnegie Hall, Alexander attended unannounced, seated in a quiet corner of the upper tier. The music, simple, unadorned, filled the space with a calm that words could not reach. Near the close of the program, his gaze drifted across the audience. There, a few rows away, sat Eliza Monroe. Alone, composed, her attention fixed not on the room but on the music. Their eyes met briefly, a moment unplanned and unforced. No words passed between them, no gestures followed, save a subtle incline of Alexander's head and the faintest smile from Eliza in return. Acknowledgement without expectation. As the final notes faded, Alexander remained seated while the crowd thinned. No attempt was made to seek her out. The evening was complete as it was. Walking home beneath the cold starlit sky, he felt neither triumph nor regret, only a quiet acceptance that some chapters closed not with declarations, but with the simple grace of having chosen at last to act rightly. The city around him buzzed with its usual restless energy. His place in it had changed, not through wealth or influence, but through a choice that would never make the front page. And that was enough.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Your support helps us grow and bring you even more amazing content. See you in the next one.